Well, hi everyone again. Thank you so much. As we go through this process, and in this next 30-ish minutes, however long we're going to be here, 30-ish, the main goal of this presentation is to update you on some of the kind of overarching changes that are happening in higher ed in the Commonwealth, and then of course some of our individual changes that are happening, whether we're at a large institution, small institution, state-funded institution, private institution, whatever. This panel is really open for questions. We absolutely can, tell you what we've got going on, but we want to know what you want to know of us, because really that's the goal here, is to make sure that with all of the changes that we've got going on, that you have some sense of clarity as we go through, especially because we have a little bit of a strange opportunity, right, to be in your school or to be virtually with your students or what have you. So we want to make sure that as we go through this process, there's at least some baseline of understanding. And then of course, there's always nuance, right, with our individual institutions as we're going through the process. So I will actually let the guys start and kind of talk. And I just talk a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and let them start with maybe some of your overarching changes that are happening, or kind of what you're seeing maybe happening in higher ed in the Commonwealth. And then you all, again, if you have questions, just throw them out there, and we will sort of keep the conversation rolling in that way. Clayton, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. So good to virtually be with you all this morning. I'm sorry that we cannot do this in person, but glad that we still get to gather together. I think that a lot of this year is a continuation of last year. We've kind of really fine-tuned test optional and really kind of how that is going through the admissions pipeline. The University of Kentucky has announced recently that test optional will go through the 2024-2025 school year at the least, and then will obviously be reevaluated for further use. But just as far as kind of the big picture, I think that for us at least, we have really kind of just fine-tuned what that process looks like, being able to get decisions out earlier, being able to counsel students better, and really kind of know what test optional looks like for each student, because whenever I'm talking with a student, it is a very individualized decision. Some students, it makes more sense to send a test score with their application because maybe they have a lower GPA and it can help boost their application. Some students, it makes sense just to send the GPA because they maybe have a really high GPA and a lower test score. So I would say that, Amy, do you want me to get kind of technical with us or kind of hold off on that until a little later? I can definitely touch on some of those things, but just big picture, I think for us, it's really kind of getting more comfortable with test optional, getting our review process really squared away. And we're really excited for this year with a lot of the changes that have been made.
Hey, I don't mind going and talking. I'm sorry, David, we keep cutting you off.
No, I was going to say, like, Amy, are you going to call on people or did somebody just jump in? Go.
I can, whatever you all want. Whatever you all want. I was going to call on somebody, and then I saw Kendrick unmute himself, and I was like, he is going to go next.
Only reason I talked because I saw David unmuting himself. Well, again, hey, I'm Kendrick from Murray State University. Kind of a continuation of what Clayton said, right? I think last year or during this COVID season, we all had to kind of like come together with a quick plan. And there were some bumps down the road, right, when we came up with those plans. But I think this year is more fine-tuning those plans that we had established over the last year and a half, however long we've been in this COVID season. One thing that I'm seeing, and the other panelists can talk on this as well, right, is that we're seeing test optional, right? That's really popular now with college. It's been around, but now I think the term is just more out there for students. One thing, at least the students we're dealing with at Murray, and you guys are probably going through the same thing, is that I think we need to make sure our students understand completely what test optional is. So we have students, and I tell them all the time, test optional is great. It's going to get you admitted. At Murray State, for instance, we did add scholarships when we went test optional for some students where their ACT score isn't required or SAT scores. However, there are still a vast majority of our larger money scholarships are still looking at those tests, right? So even though these students here test optional, they think, okay, I don't have to worry about it at all. My GPA is going to cover everything. That may not be the case. So if you're on the high school side or anything along those lines, we'd be happy to talk to those students about that. But if you could kind of let them know as well too. Let's take a deeper look at the college. Maybe there are some schools out there that where that the GPA does cover everything, but it's important to ask those questions, right, while you're talking to these college. What exactly does test optional mean? How is that going to affect me scholarship wise and everything? So that's what we've been focused on. Now that we're test optional, what can we do extra for funding for these students who are going to be coming in test optional and everything along those lines? So it's just a working process basically. But I know that's one big thing that I've been seeing with students, trying to balance what test optional actually means for students for admissions and the scholarship portion, which we know, especially for our students in Kentucky, that's a huge part of their college selection process as well. So I'll pass it to David, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, I do want to piggyback on that. Personally, I think test optional is here to stay from now on. It's the history of higher ed is not to make things more inclusive and then go back and make it more restrictive. So I think a lot of places have committed, to the next 2 or 3 years. I think at that point, colleges are going to have enough evidence to convince their faculty that test optional is not the end of the world and it all works and we can live with it. And I think it'll probably just keep going forever and ever. I do want to mention Clayton has perhaps the strongest beard game I have seen in a long time. So shout out for that. In terms of, there was a question about, what advice can you give parents about test optional? I think the biggest thing I would want to convey to parents is that colleges are not trying to trick anybody. It seems like, you tell a student you're test optional and they'll say, yeah, but really, is it like, what disadvantage am I going to be at if I don't submit scores? And every college will have a slightly different policy, whether they need tests for scholarships or not, or so on. But colleges are being really upfront about that. I just, you can probably find the information on websites, but just ask questions. Colleges are going to be really transparent because tricking anybody never works to our advantage in the long run. Just some other observations about some trends. It seems like coming off of last year and a very disrupted year in high schools as well as colleges, parents, I think going forward, parents are going to be more concerned and ask more questions about academic support services at colleges and universities. There's a feeling like, well, for this year's freshmen or first year students, our senior year was kind of really weird and I'm not sure. And I've heard from many of my high school counseling friends that students were sort of checked out last year, certainly by the spring, seniors. So shoring up some potential deficiencies once they get to college is going to be a bigger issue. And because the college search process was so kind of disrupted and out of whack this past year, I think there are more first year students at colleges now who are not entirely certain they made the right choice. And I know for a fact that some high school counselors are hearing from students who are now at college that they worked with last year who are a little freaked out. And I think that's, if you're a high school student and you haven't already heard from students who are now at college that are worried about whether they made the right decision. I suspect you will be hearing from some. I think that's a thing that's happening this year. Some colleges are open for in-person visits, some are not. We all sort of beefed up our virtual visit options last year, and that's one good thing. Those are now available, and we'll continue to make sure they are available and they're good. But it's, again, students have to check with individual colleges, just as we're checking to see whether we can come to visit the high school in person or virtually. That's, every high school, every college, every university is making its own judgment about what's safe and what's a good thing to do. That's I don't see that changing probably for this entire school year. I'm hopeful by next year we will be in a much safer situation and we can all see each other face to face. So those are my initial observations.
I guess I'll kind of go next on that. So I'm Chris. I'm with Western Kentucky University. So one of the biggest trends I think we've noticed here over the past year and a half is we've noticed students are applying and making their decisions a lot later than they normally do, which is definitely understandable given the circumstances. And I think it made it especially hard when they couldn't get on to multiple campuses to take that in-person tour. So a lot of what we're doing this year is kind of like others said, it's a continuation of last year but we're doing more. We're trying to do more in-person things on our campus, have students on our campus to be able to see like firsthand what resources are available to them. So we are offering in-person tours, but we definitely have not shied away from offering them those virtual options as well, because we know we're still going through a pandemic. We understand, and we want to reach out to as many students as possible, make ourselves available to as many families as possible. So we are continuing that virtual aspect, but we are kind of ramping up a little bit more in-person opportunities. And I think by having our students on campus and them getting to see what's available to them firsthand, that gets them to apply a lot sooner, so they can get that admissions application out of the way to be able to hit other deadlines that may come up, whether it's scholarship deadlines, housing deadlines, whatever it may be. So that's definitely a trend we've noticed. The students were applying and making their decision a lot later, some at the last minute. So we're trying to encourage them, to apply earlier on. So here at WKU, we are requiring an ACT or SAT score on file for admission. However, we try to stress to them, that's not all we look at. We look at the whole character of the student. So we look for that 2.5 or above GPA. We look for, but we still want them to be as competitive as possible. So with them having a test score on file with us, that will open them up to as much financial aid or scholarship eligibility as it can. So we're kind of a little bit of an outlier in that sense. We are requiring that for admission, but yeah, that's just kind of the trends we've noticed.
I guess I can step in here at Georgetown College. It's good to see you all virtually. I've seen some of you. It's been a while, but that is the season, right? The season of helping students has looked very differently, and it's helped us to rethink and also try to at least empathize with the educators across Kentucky. I think for me, it's just very humbling just to, I don't even know the gravity of all the things that our educators are handling right now with potential closing school for a week. What does that do for the students, and what does it do for the staff and their morale? And so for educators out there, we just appreciate all that you're doing to give students an opportunity to learn, to better themselves and get a higher education if that is their intended goal. At least for us at Georgetown, we did test optional. We kind of toyed around it before this became a full thing. We are exploring some other institutions that were doing it because we wanted to see what does it allow us to do. But at least for me personally, and I think as an institution or institutions, realized that test optional allows to give students an opportunity to envision themselves at places they never thought they would be. That's the thing I've taken away from this, is that I've seen students, especially for private schools, we've been so much maybe lean towards the higher academic metrics, right? But those are not all the telling signs of success for a student. So I've been thoroughly impressed by how students have just taken that opportunity and applied it to our institution or private institutions altogether. And it helps me think collectively about the things that we need to think about as institutions to prepare for these changes. I agree, right? What are the academic support services going to look like, right? If we don't have test scores, we don't necessarily have a way to figure out how is the student's writing quality going to be? How is their critical thinking going to be? How is their, just even how retention wise, those are the other things we're going to have to start thinking about long term. So at least for us in higher education, we are going to have to, it's on us to try to develop those systems, even counseling, right? Just think about that piece. A lot of the students, the stresses of being in a COVID environment have been enormous. And I can't underscore why it's important for us to be able to provide those services for them. Another piece that I also wanted to throw in here was just, I was very pleased with how some of the guidance counselors still continue to offer virtual visit options. There were a couple of counselors I work with, some students, schools in Lexington, but they still used rep visits. So that's maybe a place where I'd like to see, and I just bring this back to the schools. If you can, if that's the only way you can allow us to be able to engage with your students, please use rep visits. I know it's been a good platform for me. Even if I met with 1 or 2 students, I believe it was worth of their time. So those are things that allow us to engage with their students and help them, because, to prepare the students early, I think it has been expressed, applying early helps us figure out, hey, how are your grades doing? Because that's the other piece. There are students who applied way too late in some cases in their GPA, they had no time to recover from that. So I think that encouraging students right now to apply early prepares them for the things like the FAFSA. That way we can talk about finances, we can talk about next steps. But that was my observation from Georgetown College's perspective. And I also appreciate, at least for this term, what AC has done to at least offer some college fair options for our institutions and for the students.
Thank you all. I think University of Louisville, I can easily say, yep, to what Clayton says. So we do a lot of things pretty similarly. I think that the thing that I would want students, families to take away is that the term I use is test flexible. we use your ACT score if it advantages you in the application or scholarship process, right? So we never want that to be a barrier. At U of L, regardless of whether we have a test score on file for you or not, we also know that students take often the March test, not knowing how they're going to do, but knowing that they may want to come to our institution, so they put our information on there, right? So then it automatically gets sent to us even before they have the opportunity to say, oh, wait, like I want to be test score optional, right? So, as we take all of that into consideration, I think the theme should be, we will not we're not looking for reasons to deny your students. That's the goal. The goal is to get your students into the institutions that make the best sense for them, and to help them through the process. Chris had a question. I don't know if you all can see these. I think you probably can. But his question is, if your colleges see a test score, but the better scholarship is available through test optional, will the students be automatically awarded the larger scholarship?
I can start off with that.
Yeah.
So last year when we started test optional, we also did test optional scholarships, and we had the vision to make sure that we did what's best by the student. So if you applied with a test score and you applied the traditional way, but your GPA itself would yield you a higher scholarship, then you were eligible for that higher scholarship. And we are continuing that. So So if you are, I would just say if you're talking with students and families, for UK at least, we always say that we are going to do what's best by the student. That's kind of how we just phrase it simply. And then we're always happy to kind of talk with them about the more intricacies that come with that.
We do a pretty similar thing at Center. We took the phrase, is it from the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm? So that there's a debate. I listened to a webinar where a well-respected college admission person argued that we ought to just respect the wishes of the student. If the student says, I want my test score considered, then we ought to consider that test score. I respectfully dissent because I think those of us who work in college admission are in a better position to know whether the test score is helpful or not. So I think I think we have some responsibility to guide a student if we are at an institution that has a test optional policy. So for Center, no, the test score is not going to hurt you, whether you use it or not. We'll figure out what is the best advantage for the student.
And I kind of want to emphasize that as well. Like, even though here at WKU, like they need to have a test score on file to be admitted, there's not like a threshold or a certain score that we look for. And we always try to go with the advantage of the student based upon their GPA. And most of our scholarships, like our academic merit awards, those are just going to be based upon like their unweighted high school GPA. So most will not require a test score. The main ones here that will require like a certain score to be eligible for that scholarship are some of our more competitive awards, like our full ride awards or our top merit award. But other than that, most scholarships are not going to look at a test score.
Yeah, I think it's the same common theme as well. Kind of the same thing that's been spoken with Murray as well. I think what you're seeing, which is good to hear, honestly, it sounds like a lot of the Kentucky colleges are trying to do what's best for the students. And that's all of our jobs, right? To make sure that we're supporting our students the best way possible. So that's very encouraging to hear from all of our colleagues across the state.
I do also make the observation that sometimes some students, because somebody made a comment about test blind, but there are some students that when they apply, for some reasons, whether it's logistical or something like this, will self-report pretty high test scores, but don't send those in. And that is where we are prompted to reach out to the student and say, hey, you would be a great student for this reason, for these programs or these opportunities in these scholarships. So I think somebody, I think it was Amy who mentioned this, was we need to try to do a better job of explaining what test optional is and what it can do and how it can help you, right? And that way a student, and I don't know, some students are probably more harder on themselves than they need to be, and which is unfortunate. So I think it's going to be an educational process together, right? With educators, with the guidance staff to say, this can only help you, right? Because sometimes we may need those test scores in a sense, because there are some institutions, I believe here, that will need to have a minimum benchmark for an English or math, in some cases for making those decisions, because there may be some reasons why while you get an essay required, there's some schools that require an essay in this process. I know that we also take that into consideration because we want to take it the whole picture, right? Sometimes a student can tell us, man, I had a pretty rough 9th grade, had pretty rough 10th grade. That helps me understand how you have been going about your education. So I think what that presents for students and the opportunities there.
I also just really quickly want to chime in about this as well. I think that one point of clarity that I've made a lot to students, especially in this past year, is we are ACT SAT test optional, right? You may, to Teacher's point, still have to complete an AccuPlacer for placement, right? Because there are still some things that we need to evaluate to make sure that we get you in a correct class placement. So if students aren't bringing in AP, if they're not bringing in dual credit, there are times where we may need to have that additional test. Now, it's not the same as the ACT, right? It's not a 4-hour, it's typically a single subject, whatever the case may be there. Also, I think Clayton mentioned this as well. Some of the larger institutions, we're navigating what our schools and our faculty want and what they expect out of their students. So as we're going through this test score optional process, there are times where, I'm going to use engineering because I'm sure that there is a specific math level that our colleges of engineering need you to be at to be successful in the program, right? So even though we are test score optional typically for the university, there are students that may be applying for particular programs where they don't get admitted into the program, they get admitted into the university. And we understand that that is frustrating, but we are also navigating that in year 2, halfway through a pandemic, with our faculty, our deans, and things like that, to make sure that we, to David's point, can provide them with the data that says these students coming in are going to be successful because of X, right? And you need some historical data to make sure that you can properly offer that. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. So many of us are talking about test optional, but it is typically ACT or SAT test optional, and we may still require your student to take some sort of standardized test to help them in course placement, or to help us figure out their course placement.
And if I can just, the question about, I'm not aware of Kentucky schools that are talking about going test blind. If I am defining the phrase the same way that Joel is, who asked the question, we are essentially, I think, doing that at Center, because as we talked about test optional, we also had a whole big discussion about whether we do a very holistic review. We are sort of evaluating individual, essays and recommendations and course selection and so forth. But we had a big discussion about whether or not, if we saw a test score before we started to review an application, did that bias us in some, did we make assumptions about the essay? Did we assume it was a better essay because they had a high test score? So we actually hide the scores in our system. And when the initial review of the application is happening, the counselor really doesn't know what the test score is. It gets factored in later. So I don't know if that's technically test blind or not, but I think it accomplishes that sort of thing.
Well, thank you to all our panelists. I have a couple more Q&A questions here, and we have a few more minutes, so I would like to just try and fire these off at you. One is specifically for Clayton. Can you speak to the limited number of GSP scholarships being given by UK? And is there any advice you can give students on when to get those apps in to ensure they receive the award?
Yeah, thank you, Avery. I was typing out an answer because I wasn't sure if that was seen by everyone or not, but I'm happy to kind of help answer that question to the best of my ability. We have been working through kind of our new scholarships for this year, and our Governor Scholars Presidential Scholarship is going to be available based on the availability of funds. So that is never an award that we've necessarily used the word guarantee before, but this year we are encouraging students to apply early to be eligible and receive that Governor Scholars Presidential Scholarship if they have awarded it. Our scholarship director, our recruiter who oversees scholarship efforts, is reaching out to all Governor Scholars students to let them know about that, just to encourage them to apply early in the process. Obviously, right now we're in early September, so we're not right now looking at November 30th with that December 1st deadline coming up. So I know that there is a lot of kind of vagueness that comes with apply early. I would encourage students to start thinking about getting their applications ready and submitted in the near future, and I do apologize. I just don't have that information from our scholarship office just yet as far as kind of what that timeline exactly looks like, but we do encourage students to apply early. Now, when I say that, please do not go to students and families and say, hey, if you don't apply tonight, the scholarship will be running out. But what I will say is that we would really want to work with you and your students kind of to talk more about this as we get more information. So I am more than happy to put my email in the chat and kind of get everyone connected with the appropriate person to talk with more about this. And again, I do apologize for not having more of the specific information, but just know that it is going to be based on the availability of funds this year. And we do encourage students to apply early. You know, our application has been open for about a month now. Our early action deadline is December 1st. So there is kind of that big timeline to get everything in to be eligible for our various scholarship opportunities. So we do encourage students to go ahead, if they haven't started thinking about applying, to go ahead and get that process started soon.
Well, thank you, Clayton. And again, thank you to all of our panelists. I know we are all giving you a big virtual round of applause, but unfortunately that does conclude our session. So now we are oh, no, it looks like we have 15 more minutes. Sorry, I was completely misreading that. So I do have a few more Q&A questions then. This goes out to pretty much everyone. One counselor, I assume, writes, I have many parents that are having a difficult time with this decision, I'm assuming going to college. Is there a guide or information sheet that can be helpful to students and parents that are making this decision?
I know on our page, website, we do have a parent page that at least gives them some resources about visiting scholarships, that kind of thing. So I think what's helpful is at least having some kind of a resource page, whether it's at each institution's website. But I also like what several different schools do. They have like a guidance counselor web page where they list all the resources, and some do a great job, by the way, of listing and keeping those things up to date, like scholarships available at different institutions in Kentucky. So I think that's a very good place to start off, where if you're not able to go into the school specifically or sit down and meet with a guidance counselor, I think going to like the guidance counselor website is a good resource. Again, there's several schools that I know of that do a great job updating that information.
Hey, good points, teacher. And I'm a big proponent, and I'd say it to all parents and all students and everything. We're here. And now with the virtual options as well, please set up a Zoom, pick up the phone. You can pretty much call anytime during office hours, and someone in all these offices that want to be able to pick up the phone. And I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I'm pretty sure if it takes us 3 hours on a phone call with you, we'll be on that phone 3 hours until we get all of your questions answered. I don't want it to be any barriers between us and parents. And just because you're only 40% sure you're looking at Murray State, still call me. I'll go over everything with you. We may conclude that conversation with like, you know what, everything looked good, but you're right, Murray may not be the best fit with you. And to me, that's fine, as long as we have that conversation and dialogue and we talk to it. I think from people on the call, like I think we know each other pretty well. We'll walk you through the process no matter where you are in that step. And just because you're on the phone with us, we don't just guarantee, oh, this student's coming to Murray or this student's going to U of L UK. We just want to help you where you are at whatever level and give you guys the information. So I think the easiest way to honestly deal with that is pick up the phone, set up a Zoom call or anything, even email. I know we're supposed to get off work. None of us are ever off work. When we get an email and we see it at 7 o'clock at night, most of us are replying that night back to it and everything along those lines. So the easiest way, honestly, to get all those questions answered is just get in touch with us, communicate with us, go to those websites and then look at contact information and just call, email, set up Zooms. And I promise somebody at all these schools will get right back with you and we can help anybody through that whole process.
I absolutely agree and echo all those things. I do want to put in a plug for a book that I think is really good by written together by a longtime high school counselor, longtime college director, dean of admission. It's The Truth About I'm looking at it. I had to look it up to make sure I get the title right. The Truth About College Admission, a family guide to getting in and staying together. It's good for those of us who do this to read, but it's really good to offer to parents too, as kind of a broad guide to navigating the whole thing. But we all want to be helpful, absolutely.
I'm not shocked that Chris has a copy of that book right there. So if you want to know what it looks like, there's the cover right there. I definitely echo all of what Kendrick said, and to his point, even if we can't go into the nuance of another institution, we can generally talk to you about the process, right? So like, what does our timeline look like? Most of it's pretty similar, right? If you apply between now and Thanksgiving, you're usually in pretty good shape for scholarships. If you are completing the FAFSA in the first, in October, November, you're usually in pretty good shape, right? I think we can sort of generally say for in the majority, that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at, and we can support families and get students connected. Like, I feel very comfortable saying, oh, do you need to contact Dave DeWitt? Please hold on. Let me get his contact information for you. Like, if you have and even though we don't have the same structure of the college fair, where normally I could just point down, normally right next to me to Clayton's table and say, oh, UK, yeah, he's right there. You can go talk to him. We still work in that way, right? It's the college search process for, I think, all of us, and in Kentucky ACAC, it's not about me, it's about we. We want to make sure that your students go to college. We want to make sure that your students find the next best step for them. And if that is having to let go of a student to go to another institution, hopefully I've guided them enough along the way that they can get their next steps question answered by the next person that they talk to.
Well, thank you all. I'm just going to keep it rolling because we have a couple more questions coming in. This one was from earlier in the webinar, but it goes, if your colleges see a test score, but the better scholarship is available through test optional, will students automatically be awarded the larger scholarship?
Yeah, I think maybe we saw that question and spoke to it a little bit. I think usually the answer is yes.
Okay, my apologies.
That's okay.
All right, I will roll on to the next one. Which colleges review applications as soon as they're received, both for scholarship consideration and admissions?
We do. We have an automatic scholarship process. I think many of the publics, we do like an automatic, and then if a student sends us something additional, like if you get an updated GPA, if you are submitting test scores and you get an updated test score, we make those updates for you for automatic scholarships. And then there is also a pathway for like competitive scholarships. So if there's anything additional that you need to submit something else for, you can do that. Also, for test score optional students, if a student starts test score optional because they didn't get a great score, but then they get a great score and they want to send us those scores, they can do that, right? Like, so again, like, we are test flexible. We want to make sure that if a student has, is benefited in the best way that they can. So students can also go back and they can go forward from test optional to us having evaluated their test score.
And we're very similar as well here at WKU. We start looking at applications as soon as they come in, as soon as a student submits them. So once they submit their application and send us their transcript and their test score, they usually receive their decision within about 7 to 10 days. So it's a really quick turnaround. So we do work on rolling admission here at WKU, but when we say kind of or encourage students to apply early, kind of like other institutions were mentioning earlier, we try to encourage that that during the fall semester. So sometime between August and Thanksgiving break is usually a pretty good rule of thumb for hitting those other deadlines that come up. Because like while we won't have a specific admission application deadline, we will have deadlines for like if they're interested in our honors college, that comes up December 1st usually, so pretty early, or our priority scholarships deadline around February 1st. So that's kind of what we mean with applying early, is during that fall semester timeline. And we actually have, and I'll post this in the chat, we have an admissions timeline for students to view. It's a super helpful resource. It lets them kind of have a checklist throughout their senior year of when they should be, taking the ACT, applying to the school, applying for scholarships, housing. So I'll be sure to post that in the chat for everyone as well.
And I would just add to, for UK, we recently started sending out admissions decisions, and we have in the last year adopted a new system to where when students have a decision made on their application, they get an automated email. So that decision is coming a lot quicker now than the traditional mail. We still do send the acceptance package in the mail, so they still get that physical acceptance, but they will get that kind of automated admissions decision very quickly. And as far as academic scholarships, we hope to start sending those notifications out in mid to late October, and then kind of have them on a rolling basis after that. And competitive scholarships will still be in our traditional in the springtime as far as those awards go.
I think Center may be the outlier here. We have 3 different application deadline dates. We don't begin reviewing the applications until a deadline has passed, and then we release that batch or group of admission decisions and general merit scholarship decisions all essentially for each deadline. We do a batch and release them all collectively.
Okay, well, thank you all for your answers. I have another question here. Do you have advice for students when attending virtual visits? For example, does it matter if they have their cameras on or speak, or versus typing over chat? Is there a preference? I know we are addressing this in the next panel, but maybe you guys have some insight.
Yeah, I'll get her started. When attending virtual visits, first off, a lot of it depends on the size, right? If it's going to be a group of where it happens to be a bigger school and it may be 50 people on it, then the reps may say something like, hey, any questions, chat. But a lot of the virtual visits have been more on a smaller size, what I've been seeing anyway, to where, yeah, turn your camera on, ask a question or anything, because that's just like normal human interaction, right? Talking, seeing someone's face, smiling together, getting the chance to ask those questions and everything. I know a lot of times it is nervous, right? It's different. You're talking to someone you don't know, and it may just be you and them on the screen. So it may be easier, again, as a college rep and someone who's talking to students constantly, that's great energy for me. And it makes me feel like we had a connection and I can remember your face. And I just have a memory of it when it's time to go back and review applications or scholarships and all those different things. But at the same time, if the student super is nervous and everything, I mean, I understand. And I'm willing to do the presentation anyway, but it's just something about that energy when you can see people, you can talk to them, you're having a true conversation, you're able to remember small details about that person from that conversation.
I will echo Kendrick. I know sometimes it's hard on like virtual meetings because we do them all the time, and even these panels where we talk over each other accidentally, you're trying to like kind of navigate that. When your cameras are on, it's way easier to navigate that because you can sort of anticipate when a person's going to speak. I know in my personal preference, when I do a larger group visit, I actually turn off the chat for people to connect with each other, only that they can ask questions to me. And part of that is for privacy, right? Like students feel a little bit more comfortable asking me questions if they know that their classmates are not seeing that question sometimes. And if there is a question that is, good for the larger group, I often, will say it out loud and say like, oh, here's the answer. But I think that, navigation is there. I think with one-on-ones, like those smaller, like one-on-one visits, because we do a lot of those as well. It is easier when your camera is on, but if I can hear you, it's just like being on the phone, right? So I think that most of us are flexible. I know that there is often not often, but if a student has a camera off, it may be for a reason that is none of my business, right? It's because they have family in the background, you know, whatever, they're in their car, whatever the case is, right? So I think that we know that as well. And so if a student does not have their camera on, you know, that's okay. I mean, that's, we're not going to be like, oh, Kendrick, like when I met with him, he didn't turn his camera on, and man, that really like rubbed me the wrong way, right? But I mean, I think as much as students can be comfortable with that. The other thing is if a student does do like a virtual, even though we have that option, I've been really trying to encourage students to still come to campus, still like try to get involved like on a campus or meet with me at a college fair or something, because that shouldn't be the end all be all of like what it is like of our relationship. Right. So great. I'm glad that we've done this. And now, like, I can't wait to see you on campus for a campus visit, or I can't wait to see you at our campus preview day, or whatever the case is, because as we are transitioning out, into, out of, up and down and through this, the college experience, like that is an impactful piece of making a college decision. Right. So I guess that's the other piece that I would advise students. Even if you have a one-on-one meeting with me, still come to an event, still, you know, come on a campus visit. Those things are still an important part of the process.